I think there's an interesting tension between the digital and the human and the analog, between making an art which uses human muscles, the physical walking around of a space, as opposed to a keyboard and a computer screen. But having said that, there are definite ways in which the digital world challenges the nature of our perception of the world, the way in which one can jump from this view in front of us to a completely other world with a virtual reality headset. So I'm sure that there will be some very interesting artworks that come out of these technologies. But for me, the fundamental activity of what it is to reimagine the world, to take the fragments of the world, to put them together to make something new, the process will remain the same whether you're using a pencil or a mouse and keyboard, whether it stays on a sheet of paper or exists in a virtual reality headset. I can't see the fundamentals of what it is to be making art changing in any fundamental way.
Siguiente pregunta, por favor. Raúl.
Sí, Raúl Molina, de la agencia EFE. Incidiendo un poco en la pregunta de mi compañera, me gustaría saber si después de 25 años, aquello por lo que fueron premiados Mandela y de Klerk, cree que en su país se ha logrado aquella capacidad de convivir.
Well, it's been maintained. South Africa is still a strong democracy. There's been a remarkable rapprochement that was possible through the work of particularly Mandela and the members of his organization around him, that South Africa did not descend into the violence that one's seen in so many other parts of the world when countries have tried to reorganize how they should be done. Having said that, there are still, of course, immense problems in South Africa. Levels of inequality and privilege stay as imbalanced as they were at the end of apartheid. And whether these problems will be successfully tackled by the current government is a big question, and it looks very difficult for them to solve them. As with not just Southern Africa and not just with African countries, there's a huge problem that has to do with corruption, but we know that this is not what happens simply in the third world or in developing countries. One understands that corruption on a massive scale is a central question in Europe, in North America, in the Soviet Union, all over, and we are not immune from it in South Africa. It's a huge problem for us. Will the wealth of the country be distributed, or will it stay in the hands of a small elite?
Siguiente pregunta, por favor.
Muy buenas. Julián Herrero, de La Razón. Una pregunta muy sencilla. ¿Debe ser el arte un instrumento político? Y en su caso, si se considera tan reivindicativo como Bansky.
I think for some artists, art can be a very strong political instrument, but that very much has to do with the temperament of the artist and their skill at being a pamphleteer or writing a slogan that catches people's imagination. So I'm not against that in principle. I just know that in my case, it needed a very different approach to understand the world. And I understand, for me, the fundamental importance of art is the way in which we use art to construct who we are. We confirm who we are by different poems that we've read, by pieces of music we've heard at a particular point in our life, at a book we've read, at a film we've seen. So in that sense, the production of things outside us, whether it's a film or a book or a painting, are vital in how we construct ourselves as individuals and as communities. And that, for me, is the central importance of art. Occasionally, this can work in a very direct way of energizing a whole community around one particular issue. But I don't think that's the central way that art works. I think that a political art is very interesting and important, but it has to be a political art that understands the world as paradoxical, as full of contradiction, as uncertain, and that all claims to certainty, to clear single political lines, are always false claims, bolstered with an authority that's always dependent on an authoritarian imposition.
Siguiente pregunta. Sí, aquí, ahí por favor, aquí detrás.
¿Qué tal? Buenas tardes, Alejandro Riego, de Televisión Española. Señor Kentridge, quería preguntarle por su inspiración en España. Me ha parecido leer que usted ha destacado mucho la obra de Goya. Aparte de los grabados de Goya, ¿me puede hablar de otros artistas que le hayan inspirado en su creación? Gracias.
Well, in an ironic way, to be winning the Princess of Asturias Award makes me think immediately of Velázquez's paintings of the Infanta, of other much earlier Spanish princesses. So there's a line in Spanish art that goes, for me, particularly from Velázquez to Goya and then across to Picasso, that is a central line in understanding, with Picasso certainly, a combination of modernism that keeps a connection to figuration, to the human figure. With Goya, a connection of imagination and language to the political world around him, particularly in the proverbios, to taking a phrase and allowing that to expand into a different visual universe, even if one no longer knows the specific proverb that is being referred to. With Goya, more than the others, the particular way in which his hand moves to make a drawing or an etching. So he's still very fundamental in my thinking of art making. And of the modernist, modern painters, certainly Picasso's example, not just of the political work like the Guernica, but the whole studio practice is for me emblematic of what it is to be in the studio and thinking with one's hands and one's eye.
Arturo, sí.
Gracias. Buenas tardes, Arturo Tellez de Onda Cero. El 1 de noviembre arranca una exposición sobre usted, Basta y Sobra, se llama, en el Reina Sofía. ¿Qué reacción espera del público español de cara a esa exposición?
It's always difficult for me to answer that. It's easier to ask the people as they come out of the gallery or museum. But I think the work there are two elements to it. It's very handmade and very clear in how the work is made. And then it also is happy to shift between the personal and the social in its narratives, in what it does. So when people respond, very often some people respond to the fact that you can see how the work is made, and people would think, okay, I could also do that, which is true. They're not very complicated technologies of art making. And the second is that people get held often by the music that holds you in a gallery. We know that if you have a painting on a wall, people look at it and they read the label, and if it's a long label, they'll spend 20 seconds looking at the picture. If it's a short label, they'll walk past. If it's a moving image, there's something in us from our prehistory as hunters, as dogs, as whatever predators we were, that makes us watch, whether it's a soccer ball on a screen or a video in a museum. There's something about the moving image that holds you for longer. And hopefully people will be held long enough to absorb the different images and narratives in the exhibition.
Siguiente pregunta, por favor.
Soy Cristian Franco de la Nueva España. Le decía que quería hacerle dos preguntas. Una que me confirmó una historia que he leído, no sé si es cierta, que es que cuando usted era un niño, con 5 o 6 años, se encontró en el despacho de su padre una caja con fotografías de la represión violenta en Sudáfrica. De ser cierto, ¿hasta qué punto ese hallazgo pudo influir en su obra? Y también me gustaría que me hablara, por favor, del proyecto que tiene en Sudáfrica, del Centro para la Idea Menos Buena, para que me comente un poco cuál es la finalidad de este colectivo y de este centro. Gracias.
So the story, just for other people in the room, when I was my father was a lawyer in South Africa, and he represented the families of the 69 people who were shot dead by the police at a famous or infamous massacre in South Africa in a small town called Sharpeville in 1960. And when I was that age, I must have been 5 or 6 at the time, I once went into his study and saw this glossy yellow box and thought it was a box of chocolates and opened the lid to steal a chocolate, but discovered inside there weren't chocolates but these 8 by 10 black and white photographs, which were photographs of the people who had been shot. So this was an extraordinarily violent thing to see for a 5-year-old, to suddenly understand that this violence was possible in the world. I didn't think it had had any effect. It was a thing I remembered. But many, many years later, maybe 40 years later, I made a film called Felix in Exile, in which I realized I was doing a lot of drawings of images of bodies lying in the fields. And only after the film was finished did I realize that what I had been drawing in one form or another were those photographs that I'd seen as a 5 or 6-year-old, and obviously had sat in me. There's something about the clarity of shock and moral outrage one feels as a child that always gets diluted later on. And one of the possibilities of being an artist is to try to return and recapture that childhood shock of understanding how the world is and how different it is from the way you'd expected it to be. So that story is correct. The second thing you referred to, I think, is a small art centre which I've started near my studio in Johannesburg, which is called the Centre for the Less Good Idea. Not the good idea, but the less good idea. And it's a centre for artists, musicians, poets, dancers, to work on different projects, to find and discover the energy that comes from the cross-fertilization of images and impulses. A poet working with a video artist, with a dancer, suddenly finds things from one medium suggesting something in another medium that allows something to arrive that would never have arisen on its own, either for the dancer or the video maker. And so it's a small initiative, but there's an enormous energy and interest that's coming through it, particularly for the participants, but also for the people who watch the performances. And we have 2 seasons a year, and different curators each time, and different artists invited to participate. It really comes out of the pleasure I've had and excitement of working in projects in which I've worked with a range of different collaborators, from musicians to choreographers to designers. And understanding both the way in which new work can be made, but also the kind of possibilities of what working together could be.
¿Más preguntas? Si no hay ninguna pregunta más, podemos... ¿Sí? ¿Hay una pregunta más?
Juan Antonio Tirado, de Televisión Española. ¿Cuál es la función de un artista en una sociedad en este momento? ¿Usted qué es lo que le mueve y qué es lo que de verdad le excita, o cuál cree que es su misión?
I feel a stupid answer would be saying my mission is to be at work in the studio. But it's not simply for the pleasure of what it is to take a piece of charcoal with a piece of paper and feel the paper under the charcoal. There is a way in which what one does as a matter of course in the studio as an artist, of combining fragments, of bringing the world in, rearranging the world and sending it back out from the studio, is a demonstration of how we make sense of the world, of how we take different fragments and from those construct who we are every day. And I think what that is, as I said before, I think what that has shown to me, and insofar as there's a polemic in the art making, this is the polemic, that all meanings are provisional, and that in the most objective fact we think we are seeing, there's always the biographical and the personal. And that means that all statements of certainty and of authority and of how the world is need to be undone and found, in fact, how they are constructions rather than simple reflections of the world. And that's it. I mean, I suppose that's at the back of the project. In the immediacy, the the role of the artist is to find the life and to show the life of different ideas coming together, different images sparking other images, to show the agency we have in thinking, in understanding the world, that we don't simply receive it, we always construct it as we go through the world. And for me, that's the role of the artist.